Last month, President-elect Trump told historian Douglas Brinkley that he's studying 3 presidents as models for his inauguration: John Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, and Richard Nixon. Since he's looking at those speeches, we thought we should too. Here's President Nixon.
For the first time, because the people of the world want peace and the leaders of the world are afraid of war, the times are on the side of peace. Eight years from now, America will celebrate its 200th anniversary as a nation. And within the lifetime of most people now living, mankind will celebrate that great new year which comes only once in 1,000 years, the beginning of the 3rd millennium. What kind of a nation we will be, what kind of a world we will live in, whether we shape the future in the image of our hopes, is ours to determine by our actions and our choices. The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. This honor now beckons America, the chance to help lead the world at last out of the valley of turmoil and onto that high ground of peace that man has dreamed of since the dawn of civilization. If we succeed, generations to come will say of us now living that we mastered our moment, that we helped make the world safe for mankind. This is our summons to greatness, and I believe the American people are ready to answer this call.
Here with me in New York, Jonathan Darman is also a historian and author of Landslide, LBJ and Ronald Reagan at the Dawn of a New America. And with me from Austin, Texas, H.W. Brown's a historian and professor of history at the University of Texas at Austin. He's also written several books on past presidents, including Ronald Reagan, Andrew Jackson, and FDR. Gentlemen, welcome. As we think about presidents of the past, Jonathan, I'll start with you. Coming into divisive environments here, we just heard President Nixon there in 1969, but thinking as well about other presidents, President Jefferson, FDR. I want to get your take on the challenge that you think is facing Mr. Trump with this inaugural address.
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you go actually and look at Richard Nixon's inaugural address from that day, he talked about, he borrowed a phrase from Lincoln and talked about appealing to the better angels of our nature and calling on goodness and kindness and decency. Those aren't necessarily the first thing that a lot of people think about when they think of Donald Trump, but it's also not the first thing that people think about with Richard Nixon. And for Nixon, actually calling on those things worked for a while. He, in his inaugural address, reached out to the other side. He talked about a sort of new spirit of harmony in the country. And he was, in the first years of his presidency, quite popular. He won re-election with 49 out of 50 states. So if Richard Nixon can do it, Donald Trump might be able to as well.
H.W., what do you think? What's the challenge here for Mr. Trump?
When Richard Nixon became president, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, each of them had an overriding task. With Nixon, it was to end the Vietnam War. With Franklin Roosevelt, it was to end the Depression. With Donald Trump, the task in front of him is a little bit vaguer. It's not exactly clear that there is one single thing that the country is asking Donald Trump to do. So in that respect, he has a greater challenge than Nixon and FDR did. His transition may be a little bit more like Thomas Jefferson's, where there was a very divisive political atmosphere, but exactly what the central task facing the country was something that was for Jefferson to determine. It may be for Donald Trump to do the same thing.
Let's talk about President George W. Bush. He also comes up, of course, as someone who is faced with a divided country at the time he took office in 2001. Let's go ahead and listen to some of his inauguration address.
Our unity, our union, is a serious work of leaders and citizens and every generation. And this is my solemn pledge. I will work to build a single nation of justice and opportunity. Today, we affirm a new commitment to live out our nation's promise through civility, courage, compassion, and character. America at its best matches a commitment to principle with a concern for civility. A civil society demands from each of us goodwill and respect, fair dealing, and forgiveness.
All right, H.W., I'd like to start with you. What do you think the lesson is there that perhaps could inform Mr. Trump as he goes about the task of finishing up his inaugural address?
The lesson from George W. Bush is that presidents really have no idea what is going to befall them. George W. Bush's administration began off with a fairly modest agenda, and all of a sudden comes 9/11, and things changed dramatically. Now, heaven help us, we don't have something like 9/11, but it's a reminder that presidents are by no means masters of their own fate or masters of their own agenda. Things happen, and they have to respond.
H.W. Brands and Jonathan Darman, stick around.